Biodiversity. It's just a big word for so much beauty in our world. The United Nations are telling us that it's not too late to make a difference. But only if we start now, at every level, from local to global. Our grandparents knew this. They were educated by the seasons. Their lives were completely coloured by nature. Respect, integrity, humility, simplicity. These are the pillars of common sense. When these values disappear, life and culture will collapse.
Morning, Killian. How are you, man? Where are you this morning? Breakfast tomorrow, right? I'm going to do it every 2 days now. There's the babies. Hi, babies. Morning, Heron. How the devil are you? You know, after just one night of rain, we've had a few dry days. Actually, the butterflies are better. There's a postman there. Well, I'd really love to find everyone is one of the big owl butterflies. So, well, I just heard the bare-eyed thrush, that lovely sound like a cat. He's sitting there waiting. Tanagers were here, Mot sitting up in the tree. Oh, come on, maybe some better nails. Not many bananas. They love bananas, but we haven't got many bananas this morning. Let's just put a few more out there. Let's see who comes. The frogs are doing their thing this morning because we had some rain last night. I've never really been a morning person, but living here it's just totally different because every morning it's just such a treat because you don't know what you're going to find. I'm not actually feeding Killian every morning. He doesn't need to be fed. This is fish soup. Literally just put tiny fish in it. They breathe so fast and you can hear frogs. There's his... That's what he's going to have for lunch, no doubt. But I do feed him just for the crack and just to say we've kind of keep a good relationship with him. To me, this really beats actually any concert. Just as I'm talking, there's a rufous-breasted wren which has just the most evocative, amazing song. Hard to see them, but in a way, once you have an image of these guys, it doesn't matter. And I mean, this morning it's just such a audio treat, is that the word? Just, we're getting, you know, the caiman are making noises, we've got all the banana quits, frogs are doing their chorus, and then all the time there's other elements coming in. And I actually find the birds by first hearing their sound, and then you know what you're looking for. I don't often take time out just to sit and enjoy this, and it's crazy. I mean, I get such pleasure from feeding the birds, and then think, God, I ought to go and feed someone else or start building an enclosure. But just, I mean, 10 minutes here must be the best therapy in the world. I mean, this is what people need to, it's almost like rebirth for people, just to get them in touch with this. Because even if you don't know the birds and the animals you're hearing, then I'm sorry, I'm just watching a bird up there now. If you don't know them, it really doesn't matter. Just celebrate this incredible biodiversity. And this is what we're losing in the planet, but this is what the planet was rich in, and we need it. We need this biodiversity just to survive, just to stay sane.
I was born into a forestry family business, which is in family for almost 200 years. And when I was raised as a kid, when I started walking, I walked in the forest. When I was 10 years old, I went with the forester and the hunter almost all the time in the holiday season out in our own forest. So I was growing up in forestry, and that led to the point that I became a professional forester. Just because we had it at home and I had to take over anyhow one day. So I had a university education in forestry, and after that, for some special reason, I was called by one of the biggest forest owners in Austria, the reigning Prince of Liechtenstein, to run one of the biggest private forestries when I was in my early 30s. And again, afterwards, it was just occasionally that I was called by the government of Austria to run as a CEO the Austrian state forests. So I had always had two positions in forestry. One was being private forester all the time, running their own forestry business best possible, as good as I could. And on the other hand, I was engaged by and responsible by the biggest forest organizations in Austria. That's my professional background.
So we're here as part of the EESC in Brussels is a consultative body. We're established with the treaties of Rome back in the 50s, and we're here so that ordinary citizens have a voice in the legislative process in Brussels. So it allows us to be part of the debate when legislation is being formed, when policy decisions are being made. And what's different is we're not politicians, so we're not here as professional political people, where I'm here representing environmental NGOs, the environmental sector. We have people here representing farmers, trade unions, representing different industries, representing different business interests, representing minority groups. We have youth represented, consumer organizations. Everybody who is in an organized group of citizens has a voice within this structure. Really, the best thing about being part of this institution, it has been to get a voice at the top level. So when big decisions are being made, financial decisions, environmental decisions, it's not like we get to dictate what happens, but it does mean that we get into the room. So we get to voice our concerns, or I get a privileged opportunity to voice the kind of concerns that don't often reach the decision-making table, if you like. We're very lucky that we've got our forestry in state ownership. That's something that we fought for a few years back during the economic crash in order to ensure that we didn't sell off the state assets. So it's an opportunity for us as citizens to input. Here is a juggernaut of a company, Coillte, that's moving forward with a focus on making profit and making economic returns. But because it's state-owned, we still, as communities, have a chance to input into decision-making in it. And we need our voices heard within that, because that's 7% of the country being managed by a company that's owned by politicians who represent us. It was given financial support in order to establish itself and to continue to do its functioning. It's received €170 million alone in public money support for planting trees.
When we first met, you told me that you're a forester. You've always been an artist, but you introduced yourself to me as a forester.
We both laughed.
And yes, and then of course we got into the conversation about the foundation of forestry, how I see it, how it is in our area of Europe, and we ended up with the forest law of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire from 1852, which just came because there was such a huge deforestation in the Alps that the emperor had to do something. And simple principles which could be applied everywhere, no big clear cuts, afforestation, having species which are locally adapted or locally founded. So that's something that's eternal, and this is part of the law which is still intact all over Europe with little amendments, also in Czech Republic, Hungary, wherever. That can be applied everywhere, That's what we talked about the first time.
And I think the wonderful thing you said was it's 2 or 3 pages. And here you are looking at the forestry, the documentation on the programme for Ireland's forestry, and just how complex it is. And so many different things to debate, and we've lost the common sense. And I think then working with Cillian, I'm so aware, again, if we're looking, so many decisions are now made because of grants. They're not made because of silvicultural decisions. We look at the agricultural decisions. This is what Cillian's up the whole time. It's about grants. It's not about what it means on the ground. It's not about what it means for all of us, environmentally, socially. And it's too many words. It's too complicated. And we've lost basic common sense.
They make it complicated to run their programs, some people, They just make it complicated. Because if it's too complex, then you always can talk a lot about it. But it's simple. It's like gardening. Forestry is like gardening. You just do it with trees and not with salad, It's more or less.
I love it.
Yeah.
But that level of complexity and that focus on money or focus on grants is the same thing. It seems very relevant for what we're going to do tomorrow with the work I'm doing on climate finance that we spoke about before, because increasingly you see once everything is linked to the funding model, it's either the funding model or it's the economic output that you get from the thing, and the environmental or the social output, which are often best measured by common sense, are absent when the stuff is translated into policy or into legislation.
It's squeezed into it at the end for window dressing, just to tidy it up around the edges.
But it loses its place as one of the founding blocks of the decision.
That was the point why we founded, Ian, you and Julien, and a little bit myself, Manchester State, an example, just have a simple example. As you do a showpiece for a garden or for something else, you just put the showpiece and put away all the theory and say, look, let's make a patch where we do what we think how it should be. And that was simple and clear and also unique in Ireland, the extent you did it.
But in fact, simple and clear, the challenge to do it like that was so huge. I mean, you just had to argue. I mean, it shouldn't be, it's not rocket science, but it shouldn't be hard work to get a tree in the ground. But it's actually very challenging to get a tree in the ground in Ireland.
When we started with the MENSH project, the Irish Natural Forestry Foundation, our aim was to help Ireland or to set up a scheme or make an example of what actually does grow in Ireland. Because just to have 5 or 6 or maybe 10 different plants is ridiculous, because there is such a variety. And the more variety, of course, the more health will there be for the trees and for the forestry. And how it was handled here was actually an eyesore. And we wanted together to make an impact that everybody could see the beauty in it, because it's not just a practical thing that you have a harvest from the forest, but that it enhances the landscape. And as it is now, we are all talking about sustainability, and who does anything about it? Nobody, or very few. And it is high time that people become aware, because what we are doing presently is destroying our beautiful planet, and in particular also Ireland. there have to be great changes which can go step by step. They don't have to be done all immediately, but it would be nice to see Ireland in its original beauty, just adapted to nowadays.
We are here in Manch. I was so fortunate to come across this piece of land, to work with the landowner, to work with the Forest Service, to work with private people, to give me encouragement and funding. But what I wanted to do was prove what we should be doing with European money. What we should be doing, what the country needed, was to plant broadleaf trees, to actually start growing native forests again. And the government should have been doing it. The focus of the government should have been on this, but it wasn't, and it still isn't. But this is unique in the country, the amount of planting we've done here, the experiments we've done here. And this now, I don't have to kid anyone that this is going to be a forest. This is here, we can learn from it. The Forest Service once said to me when I started, this is very interesting experiment, we'll come back in 40 years and see what we can learn. That's such a sad, sad approach, because there's so much to learn from this here. We've made lots of mistakes, but we've also had some amazing successes. And even the mistakes mean we still have a diverse native forest, which is so essential to Ireland's biodiversity. I'm just driving into the Injunction field. Now, this was 17 acres of arable land. And when we planted it, the neighbours, the farmers, were furious at a waste of arable land, but it was a fantastic experiment for me. And there's so much more we could learn from this. But what we're driving through here, just imagine this had not a tree for 17 acres. And we've done lots of experiments. Now, interesting, on this line I'm driving, most of the field had been used for rotational crops and been sprayed with Roundup. And then on our left-hand side, had just been used for grass, and the difference was incredible. We look at the trees, and the size of the trees, they're 3-4 times the size on the left-hand side than the right-hand side, which just tells the story that most of Ireland's prime agricultural land is poisoned. It's too sick to grow a tree. Had we had a sensible forestry programme, had we used the money wisely, 10% of Ireland could now look like this. Now, there's a commercial value on it, but the actual natural capital value is just huge. The different birds, the different insects that this ecosystem supports. And this will be a forest for eternity. We look at something like this. These trees are 14 years old. I mean, this is a statement that said they are happy here, it's the right tree, they're really, really growing well. This is not new, this is not rocket science, it's globally acknowledged about provenance, about using native species. And Ireland's got obsessed with planting this, aiming for this critical mass of timber to come out of the plantations. But it's nothing about forestry. It's a different world. It's a misnomer to call the Forest Service the Forest Service. They're not dealing in forests. And so Ireland, after 20 years of planting, has got the same amount of forest as when they started. This is when we're talking about native trees. We've cut down so many, we've put Sitka spruce in their place, we've planted others. And people have also been encouraged still to put native trees in, but in monocultures. Nature doesn't do monocultures. So if we have ash dieback disease, we have a bit of a change in climate, we could lose all the planting we've done. Whereas a forest is resilient to that. Yes, it could lose one species, it could lose two species, because it's got all of these other species there to support the infrastructure, which is a forest, a whole ecosystem, which is a forest. We haven't even started planting forests in Ireland, and we've spent on average 100 million a year, taxpayers' money, to fail to plant forests. It's acknowledged globally that forests are essential to our very survival. They absorb carbon from the atmosphere. They store huge amounts of water, forests. They control our water. Without the forest, the water would run off. We would lose water, which is an essential element for us all to survive. They are a wealth of biodiversity. They provide food. They provide all the infrastructure we need to survive. They also provide timber. But the essential thing about a forest is it's not transient. It's not like a field of wheat. We don't cut it down. It's there for all time because it's supporting this complex life system. In Ireland, we have opted to go for plantations, and the best we can hope for a 40-year-old forest in Ireland is this.
This field was an orchard field when I was young. There was a tall orchard here, and then that started to fall and get old and decay. And so since I was about 16, I started planting a mix of hardwoods here. Some native, some more for a garden type setting. So there's from field maple to walnut to oak. So this is a mix of hardwoods, predominantly ash, some French walnut. This has been sourced in France. This particular timber has come from a sawmill near Toulouse. A lady there that I've dealt with for quite a few years. So she's developed an understanding, I guess, of my work, what I'm doing with it. So she's putting trees to one side specifically for me, cutting them in the correct thicknesses that we require. As you can see, I'm buying them as boules, full trees. Mm-hmm. So we're able to select then from within the tree, crown, quarter sawn, intermediate grain, depending on the project and the requirement. But I suppose from my point of view, working with somebody like that has that kind of continuity in forestry culture, and the sawmill is a part of that. There's a knowledge and craftsmanship in the sawmill and respect for their material, which you can see their enthusiasm and excitement when they're telling me about a tree that they think is right for me. Yeah. In the Magna sculpture, this is something we want to realize. There's a certain scale to it. There's a dimensional requirement. There's a material grain, the kind of straightness of a grain or stability. So I have to be able to talk to somebody that's that informed and are willing to go on the journey. Forestry can allow you to appreciate the seasons. A hardwood forest can, a Sitka forest can't. And it's developing those cultural nuances that are so rich, and then it can go through a whole life cycle, and then you have this resource that can support a workshop like this. So I think once you can educate people about the value of this resource, from those subtleties right through its life to the end result, then I think we could be optimistic.
So here we just have some of Ophelia's victims waiting for the saw. Different species of trees, they have different wants. The ash we could leave for a couple of years, it would be stable, we'd still get beautiful planks out of it. The oak, we could leave that there for 10 years before we cut it if we wanted to. But you'll actually see the oak on the end, it's cracking, those cracks are going to open up and they will close again. But the beech is the fussy one. The beech, beautiful tree, but it needs to be cut. Within 6 months, it gets this black fungus on it that creeps through the tree. If you get the timing right, it's worth even more money. It's called spotted beech with this beautiful black patina through it. If it goes too far, in a few months it could rot and you'd waste this and you're back down to firewood. So you have to understand the characters of the trees and also know what you want from the end of it, what you want that piece of timber to turn into. As a resource, if we're actually looking at forests paying for themselves, this timber is worth an awful lot of money. Now, here in Ireland, we have a culture that we're ignoring our own native timber. But at Manch here, we've proved it and actually found there's an incredible value in this timber and there's a demand. Obviously, it's a limited demand because no one else is doing it. Now, the Coillte, the state forestry company, had a sawmill processing this timber, but in fact they closed it. It just seems that we're just not interested in native trees in Ireland. Sycamore trees in Ireland are treated as a weed. The Forest Service condemned them with their native woodland grant. This is what a sycamore tree can turn into. This is a work of art. This beautiful, as an artist, the patina in here, this just as a plank of wood is worthy of any sculpture. This can be turned into a tabletop, this can be turned into a kitchen. This is grown in Ireland from a tree we're treating as a weed. So the kids love them. Remember the sycamores with the little spirals, their little helicopter seeds? Those are broadcast all over the country, and yes, they seed very well. And because they sprout up, we treat them as a weed. In fact, we should celebrate them as one of our native, beautiful trees.
Let's say biodiversity in forestry means gardening. It's like gardening. That means you need more hands on the ground, you need more hands in creating the plants, you need more hands in planting the plants, and you need more hands in raising them up, the plants. Then first looking after the plants, then making the thinnings, and have a continuously growing forest with a biodiversity. So you have employment wherever, and you will create forests where you and me would like to walk in. Did you ever try to walk in a Sitka forest? It's impossible to pass a Sitka forest. Go in a big park and see the old trees or alongside the rivers, and you can walk in it. You can have the population to take part of that if you do that. So it just takes patience and investments and professionality. And if you don't have it, look around, best practice wherever they do, all over Europe, or go even, I don't know, go to Canada, wherever you would like to go, and take best practice and the help to do it. But you need to do it from above. It needs a decision on the top. The decision on the top means the government. The government must give, first of all, the state forests, culture, an incentive, not taking out money from culture from the budget, but leave them to invest it and help them. And that would change the country. That would change forestry diversity, and it would create jobs, and it would create only positive effects on the population also.
People often ask, how come Tobago? Why are you in Tobago? 10 years ago, Linny was having a bad year. She'd broken her arm 3 times in a year. And the doctor had actually said, look, she's an artist, she's never going to draw again, she's not going to paint again. And what it really needs is warm water, the therapy of swimming in nice tropical waters. And we were going through one of our poor periods, and the most we could achieve was to get to the Canary Islands. And so Julien, our wonderful friend and sponsor who's just helped us so much with this outrageous life we've had, said, you've got to go to the tropics. Go to the tropics, I'll just give you, whatever you need to on top of what you've got. So we went into a travel agent, opened one of those flash brochures. It said Tobago. Linny just said, that's it, that's where I want to go. There was a cancellation. 3 days later, we arrived in Tobago. We got off the plane, and it was really fascinating. Linny just said, I'm a home. We met Roy Corbin. He is our partner in this whole venture. We're working together. Roy was born and bred here. He's got 20 acres here. As a child, this place was all grassland. Tobago's run out of grasslands. And strangely enough, the knock-on effect from that is it's impacted hugely on their butterflies. So Roy had no real value on the bush. But he'd been a hunter his whole life and had determined that he should stop hunting. And he was a very, very famous hunter, but he said, let's stop hunting. We're running out of animals. The animals are getting smaller. He wanted to do something about it. He'd actually sort of used the word like petting zoo, which just made me panic and scared. So, okay, Roy, that's not the way we should go. So we knocked it around and said, let's just try and breed and release all the animals that ever were on Tobago. So we called it Corbin Local because we're just dealing in local animals. And Roy would say, well, couldn't we just have a monkey? But he goes, no, Roy, if we have a monkey, we're going to end up with a giraffe. So it's celebrating what Tobago's got. And that was actually how the whole project started between us.
Come on, where's your mate?
I've rarely met anyone in my life that I have such a rapport with as Roy. And I love that, and I'm fascinated by that because we have total different experience of life. And yet we just have this rapport and this energy that we develop between us, and we're really good at problem solving. So even putting this little wooden house up here was a lot of problem solving, but we did it together, and it just fell into place. And if in doing that we can prove you don't have to have a fortune to do it, to do what Roy and myself are achieving here on a tiny, tiny budget, but you're starting to see the impact already. Every day, every 2-3 times a week, you'll get a phone call and saying, the snake's just eaten my cat, or it's been found in a shop. Those would all have been killed before we started doing this. But Corbin just gets a call, he goes there, we collect those snakes, and we release them to other places on the island. If they're damaged, if they're pregnant, we keep them until they've given birth or till we've repaired them. But there's that, people are starting to say, hey, what Corbin's doing is making sense. The kids are coming back and saying, wow, we've just had this wonderful day. And like I say, more and more local people are coming into us to remind themselves of what we've got here. It seems so hugely important to get the country to celebrate what they've got here and to get these animals in the numbers they should be, to get the ecosystem right around the island. And Roy's got to make a living from this. And it's proving possible now. And the lovely thing is, these kids come in, they, for the first time in their life, see an armadillo, a tattoo. Now, they're eating it every Sunday at harvest, and we're a big thing, we were eating bushmeat. When they look at the armadillo, when they look at the snakes, when they look at the caimans and say, this is what we're eating, they go home to the parents and say, hey, you guys, we're not eating bushmeat anymore. And it's working so well on so many different levels. I think when we started, a lot of people said to me, this is never going to work. The hunters are going to come in here and clear you out. But Roy, because he had such a following and a respect as a hunter and as a farmer, people have respected what he's doing. And the message gets out there. And I didn't expect to have as many visitors as we do from Tobago and from Trinidad. I'd never seen an ocelot. An ocelot is a cat about this big, and we knew we were going to try and get them. 3 years ago, they knew there was 100 left in Trinidad. And I just then went back to where I started and thought, no, you can't put a cat in a cage. I mean, it just feels so wrong. And then you thought, but God, how else do we get it breeding? How do we get them to be able to release in here? So we've built it a very large cage on a steep escarpment, quite a challenge to build. And then just last week, we got a phone call to say a cat had been taken away, an ocelot had been taken away from a hunter who had caught it illegally, and we could have it. And what a privilege, what a remarkable experience. So we've had that a week. We're still learning how to feed it, just how to relate to it. It's a wild animal. I still hate it being in an enclosure, but we've given it the best we can, and it's settling into there. But just the privilege of seeing an animal as beautiful as that, and most people in their lives are never going to see it.
Here again, at Corbin Local Wildlife Park, we try our best to educate the local especially. We give everyone information, but we are focusing on our local people. Why? Because here in Tobago, they recently start eating these guys. And not only these guys, everything that moves in Tobago, it's in the pot at some time. So we at Corbin Local, we are trying our best to get the message over to the local people of how important each animal, individual animal, is on the island. Without these animals, our survival is doomed. So I guess once we get that message over to folks, because everybody want to live long and happy lives. So I guess if people believe that these animals are keeping us alive, they would also be saved, and we would also be helped in saving these animals.
This Forestry Industries Ireland analysis is somewhat misleading. Only 12.8% of carbon in forests is tied up in trees above ground. The vast majority is contained in the soil. In assessing the potential for trees to mitigate against climate change, we need to break the link between growing trees and the forestry industry which cuts them down. Growing forests sequesters carbon. Forestry activities emit carbon. The carbon accounting does not factor in the use of fossil fuels in establishment, maintenance, forest road construction, harvesting, transport, timber processing, and the redistribution of timber products. Each 100 litres of fuel used emits approximately 268 kgs of CO2. Recent research from the US points to the forestry industry as being a net emitter of carbon.
20 years ago, the Forest Service recommended to the landowner that, or advised the landowner that this beautiful piece of forest had no value, recommended cutting it down, planting Sitka spruce. Fortunately, the Forest Service saw the light and started to appreciate just how important these remnant pieces of forest are to the Irish biodiversity, to the country. It's its heritage, it's essential. And they introduced a grant called the Native Woodland Grant. The grant advised that we should cut down all non-native trees, which is beeches, which are sycamores, which are such an important part of the ecosystem here. And we can't afford to be racist. We can't afford to cut down hardwood trees. So we got the grant, and then we said, you know what? We're actually not going to cut down the beech. So we had a standoff, essentially, because the Forest Service was saying, let's cut down trees like this. In the end, we came to this compromise because it was very easy to bring the press in and say, look, we are being advised to cut down this stunning tree. And we came up with a term called a feature tree. If it was a feature tree, we could keep it. One word has saved an awful lot of beech trees in the country. I think one of the things that actually destroys a lot of artists is the fact that people say you need a bread and butter line and then you can do what you want. But I think it's a law of nature that we all need slightly more money than we're earning. So if you have a bread and butter line, you always keep having to earn more money just to feed that habit because you got used to having the money. And therefore, creatively, you don't stop. You're doing your teacups or you're doing your painting that you know sells. You never change what you're making. And because of Linny's attitude, and also I understood it and relished what she did, we basically, our whole lives have pulled the rug out from under our feet. So just if you find a line that's really selling, we would stop making it. It broke our professional friends' hearts. It broke our people who had the courage to retail what we were making. It broke their hearts because they said, great, we've just sold that. Can we have another 20? So no, we've stopped making it. Linny made the most beautiful tiles. And the tiles could have just taken off. He said, you know what? I like the painting, but I actually don't like dealing with the people and what you had to go through to put those tiles on the wall. So looking back on it, we've actually had this luxury of just being able to say, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to make something completely different. It keeps you on edge. And, you know, at this age, it's kind of nice to feel like I'm a student. And like I said, I've never really determined between what's environmental work or what's creative. There's a gut thing that says, this is what I'm going to do. People often said, like when we first came to Ireland, you were very brave. There was no question about being brave. You know, I didn't like what was happening in England. I was convinced the world was going to end in 7 years. I wanted to come and learn to milk a cow and be self-sufficient. And even to the extent of what I'm doing now, setting up a biodiversity project, breeding and releasing animals in Tobago, it's from the same energy and the same reasoning or lack of reasoning that brought me to Ireland. Don't really analyse it, you just find this is the direction I'm going in. I was feeling sad and angry in Ireland with our loss of biodiversity. To go for a walk and record what isn't there is just the saddest thing to do. You just go back and you think that the migrant birds haven't come in, the butterflies aren't there. You come back feeling empty. So it's a survival thing to find I'm now spending most of my life in the middle of a rainforest in Tobago, breeding the animals that were missing there, the indigenous animals, and trying to support the biodiversity there. But it's not all altruistic. It's actually to keep me sane, just to feel fulfilled every day. Every day when I'm involved with that project, there's a new bird, there's a new bug, there's a new creature. So you're just filled every day with the sort of abundance of nature. And creatively, it's the same as making lakes, when to me that's purely sculptural. Putting this package together in Tobago, hiding these enclosures in the forest to allow people to come in and experience animals in their own the environment, in their natural environment. And then I use it a lot, this playing God, to say, well, we're going to create not just a rainforest, an exceedingly rich forest. We're going to put extra plants in. We're going to put hundreds of fruiting trees in so the birds can come in. It's a Garden of Eden to attract the things in. And it's the same part of the head. It's I just feel so privileged that I've just been allowed to do that and not think, oh my God, I've got to go to work. The Forest Service has failed the country. They had a very simple remit to plant forests. We haven't planted forests. We've planted plantations of alien conifers. Now what that means is these trees are not native to here. On its own, that's not a big issue, but none of our bugs and critters, none of our animals, none of our birds have adapted to living with these trees. A forest should be incredibly biodiverse. It competes with the coral reef. Loads and loads of layers of life. This has a certain stark beauty, but it's dead. It's a desert. It's a Sitka desert.
The idea that from Europe a grant is received to Ireland to say, okay, recognition of the fact that your tree cover has gone so low to 2% that you need to increase it, you have a plan to increase that, so we're going to give you money to distribute to your landowners, your various landowners, farmers, to encourage this change of culture, to encourage them to diversify into forestry. And I think what happened with that injection of capital to fund that transition was that the state established a state forestry company instead and gave the money to the state forestry company, which following our challenge of that, or institutionally our challenge of that in the European courts, the courts found that to be an illegal move, that money wasn't meant for establishing a semi-state and then taking with one hand and feeding it with the other, that it was meant to actually penetrate through to
But there were no
communities.
actions from the EU to the state misusing.
There was
in fact,
there was a finding. There's a court finding against
the
them.
funding that Coillte had hoped to draw down is nearly 60 million in the next 10 years, and they'd already bought lots of land from farmers to avail of that funding. They were then told they couldn't get that funding, and they were then fined 7.8 million, I think, which the taxpayer paid for misappropriating those funds. So that sort of stopped the strategic plan, which is to cover 17% of the country in monoculture.
To go back to the common sense element of that is we now have a state forestry company which is on record as saying they don't plant any trees. So they haven't been planting tree, like they replant areas that are cut down, or if they sell a piece of land for wind development, they have to cut the trees down to put up the wind farms, and so they plant them somewhere else. But in terms of being contributing to our goals to reforest the country, the state forestry company is completely inactive in that area because it's not receiving the free money in order to do it. So you would think if the destructive model that we have, demonstrably destructive socially, demonstrably destructive environmentally, if the third pillar of sustainable development means that, well, at least it's a really strong economic model, there would be some argument for that. But the economics don't even make sense of it. So by no measurable entity can you say that this is a successful model to be working on. We've just seen a massive demonstration on the streets here around Brussels, young people who've mobilised, who've walked out, who are demanding a different way of doing business, demanding action on our current system and how it functions. And they're blaming the previous generation. They're blaming me, they're blaming us, they're blaming my parents or grandparents for how they functioned and the system that we allowed to bring us to this position. It's wrong to blame individuals. It's wrong to blame my parents for what is the situation that we're in. They weren't power players. The majority of people are not the power players in deciding what the system is. We're just trying to function within it. But all the more reason for us to band together and make our voices heard where possible and where we can make changes in order to change how that system works. The argument for establishing monocultures of non-native Sitka primarily in order to clear fell them. The big motive for that was to make a strong economic return. And that's what the response that we continually received as the environmental sector questioning this. We would say, well, the focus of this company is economic. We have an economic remit. Indeed, Coillte is exempt from freedom of information because of its economic focus, because it's thought some of the information may be commercially sensitive.
Thank you, President, and thank you to the rapporteur. I'm especially pleased to see the precautionary principle and indeed the sustainable development goals included in the opinion. But let's just be careful not to tinker around the edges with those things, because when we think of sustainability, we have balance between economy, society, and environment. And what we've seen with the current economic system and current trade agreements is that they've led to a collapse in all three areas. A financial crisis representing economic collapse, a huge biodiversity loss representing the environmental collapse, and it could very easily be argued the rise of the far right and extremism representing a societal collapse also. So we must not just use sustainable development as an add-on, an excuse to continue business as usual and just have some pretty wording on the side of it. Let's use this opinion as a stepping stone to create real systems change and the systemic change that's required. Thank you.
On the road and sea. Last night as I was trimming the clim, singing the verse of the evening hymn, a voice from starboard shouted ahoy, and there was me mother sitting on a boy. Yo ho ho, the wind blows free, oh for a life on the rolling sea. My mother then she asked of me what became of my children three. One was sold as a cooking dish and the other was sold as a talking fish. Yo ho ho, the wind blows free, oh for a life on the rolling sea.
I turned up in Ireland nearly 50 years ago on the hippie trail, coming over to be self-sufficient, and I fell in love with the country. I arrived with a £5 in my pocket and living in the back of a Land Rover, and Ireland's treated me so well on so many levels.
This is just a celebration of biodiversity, to feel so privileged to stand in this, absorb it. I don't understand most of it. I don't understand the different ecosystems, the different reliance on the bugs and critters, the different birds, but it's a complete, dynamic, changing ecosystem, and it's what we've lost. We've lost in a lot of the world, but in Ireland we haven't even got near it. There's a few places in Ireland where if we only celebrated and looked after the biodiversity, it would be a rich experience to walk through it. But in the end, we're ending up with trees, but no bugs, no critters, because of what we're doing to the rest of the country. As I've travelled the world talking to people about the Irish forestry programme, they're just shocked. It just doesn't make sense that we have to put biodiversity into a forest. The absolute essential element of a forest is it's biodiverse. And God, is this a celebration of it.
A lot of the environmental movement is often about criticising or knocking what exists without offering an alternative, which is, you know...
Yeah, that was very much the motivation. Just let's just knock wall-to-wall Sitka. Let's say this is what we should be doing and illustrate there's this pot of money and what Ireland could have done with it. And I mean, the sad thing is, obviously, we're down 15 years since we planted. And it's basically the only place in Ireland like it. There's a few patches planted, but Ireland could look like Manch. I mean, that's the opportunity.
I mean, a lot of it, of course, a lot of it is a huge. It's a huge thing to do, but a lot of it. And the idea, the initial idea was to put many manches, little manches like cores around the country, you know, to show the people locally, how this develops. You should have it with patches spread over the country. You know, with the same system, and then get the people in there, they see it, and you expand these kind of patches, you know?
But we don't have that culture, we don't have that thinking, and I remember both of you saying, well, look, why doesn't the state take over Manch and say, you know, fund it? Because all of us, we've had to keep raising money to develop it, to illustrate what we should be doing. And you've just said, but if the state took it over and said, this is what we should be doing, but that we don't have the forestry culture. And it's as you said, it's lacking. It's you know, there's not an interest in doing that, and I think the culture is changing. I think all of a sudden there's an awareness we're getting it wrong. There's a movement against the walls of Sitka, and so now there's an opportunity. We haven't got the time. I don't think we've got the luxury to do lots of manches in a way. What we've got to do is go into these walls of Sitka, the Sitka plantations, and we don't do the environmental knocking of them. We say, look, this is a resource. Let's go and make holes in there. Let's plant trees in there, because what Ireland needs, the trees suffer in Ireland is the wind, we need the shelter. So if we see the Sitka plantations as a resource that can allow us now to grow native forests, without saying, oh, let's do more research. We don't need to do research. You guys.
But Ian, you know, you said
proved it.
before, it's a question of culture. First of all, forest culture was abolished in Ireland no longer. And the biggest problem I see is that the farmers are not personally on board. We have 50,000 farmers in Austria, and almost all of them have a forest. And they see it as a second income, as their working place in winter. It's perfect for them. If they need something for an investment, they go and cut some trees. And that is lost in Ireland. So the driving force from the farmers, and the farmers are the driving force in our forestry as well, you know, with all respect, that's lacking. So you need to do it from top, and that's always difficult. If you don't have on the base people who are pulling, and the farmers here are not pulling. And our farmers are pulling because they see the trees are gold for them when they need some money, or when they need it for a barn or for the heating, for their stove, you know. The problem is, this, I think in Ireland, that the farmers and the Farmers Association, which we saw also in discussions, are not on board, really.
But historically, I think in Ireland, trees were a luxury. You know, they weren't seen as a commercial crop. So with the history of Ireland, the social history is that if you were wealthy enough to not have to use that piece of land to produce food, you could put trees almost as a display of your wealth.
Sorry to interrupt. We met farmers who understood. You remember in Ennis, when we had the excursion? Very, very good farmers. He could have been in Austria and Germany, everywhere. With the thinking, he saw the potential, he saw the beauty of growing something which is not here, and even having some money for it, and having money for foundation costs.
And there's remarkable farmers around the country, there's remarkable foresters around the country, but it's not the culture and it's not mainstream. And we're up against basically an industry head and this myth that actually what we're doing is commercially viable. You know.
My name is Coillte O'Donoghue. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Ireland. I'm studying to become an engineer. I would like to think my education will make a difference in the future. The Irish government are proposing to plant 440 million trees by 2040 in their response to climate change. But 70% of those trees are non-native conifers. This is 308 million more short-sighted problems. We now know the complications involved. What effect will this have on Ireland's biodiversity? What effect will the thousands of tons of chemicals used to grow these grim plantations have on our environment? Can we not see with our own eyes what will happen if we don't resist these policies? These are our lands. Does the Forestry Service work in our best interest? I don't think so. A century ago, Ireland was left with only 2% native forestry cover. And 100 years later, we still only have 2% native forestry cover. Think about that.
My whole life, I've been privileged just to play, but to actually be hugely rewarded from the playing and go off at loads of different tangents and taken it for granted and not seen it as a particularly big step. It's only when, at this stage, when people are saying, well, did you really do this in Africa? Or did you do this and did you do this? And you start joining them all up and you're thinking, that's quite a lot of, you know, rugs we've pulled out and started again. And like I say, at this age, to feel like a student again is wonderful. You know, it's new. What I'm doing at the moment is new. to be able to come back and do that. Linny make her beautiful bowls because she's inspired by the colours in Tobago. But we come to do that knowing that the reason we're making this bowl, or the reason I've just made this sculpture, is we're now going to have the funds to build an ocelot enclosure, or to build a crab-eating raccoon enclosure. That's the reason we're earning the money. But I've always needed somehow that carrot to say, because I want to do this. You know, I want to build boats in Africa. I want to take scientists out to an island in Africa. That's the reason to make money. And I'm so fortunate that I can make money by being creative. I've had, and I'm still having, such an incredibly privileged life. And I don't really know how or why or how we've got away with it. And when people come to my place in Ireland, or when they come here, so we're getting lots of visitors, people have saved up for years or all year to have their week or 2 weeks holiday here. And they come, we give them the tour, and that's getting more and more emotional as people are seeing what we're doing, understanding the animals we've already bred and we've released, and to share our passion. And then quite often at the end of the tour, we bring them up here, we bring them onto this balcony, and there's this view, and whatever it is about this place is that, oh my God factor. And they just look at you and they just think you are so rich. And I am so rich. I can't imagine what else you'd spend money on.
The older I get, I realize what kind of life quality we have here. And one also starts to think about the basics of life. Pure quality of life. Best air, best water, beautiful environment, mountains. We are lucky. We have to preserve it, of course, the next generations.